Most of us don't stop drinking after we go to our first AA meeting. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Why that happens. And frankly, it's because our ego finds ways to keep us from going back. You can call it your ego, you can call it the disease, whatever you want to call it, your willpower. It works against us, and it tries to convince us that we don't really need help, that we can do it on our own. Excuses I used to keep drinking after I first got sober when I was 24 years old. And that was back in 1984. I got sober. I went to meetings for about 5.5 months. And I started to feel better almost immediately. And I'd been drinking every day. So I felt really bad when I woke up every morning. And I would think to myself in the morning, I would be obsessed. I want to drink today. I feel really bad. I don't think I'm going to drink today. And then by noon, I would start feeling better. And by the time I got out of work, if I was working during the day, I had convinced myself that it was okay to drink. Most of the time I was bartending, and I was bartending in the evening. So by 8 or 9 o'clock at night, I'd been at work for a couple of hours, and I'd start to feel better and start to sneak drinks. I was too young to be an alcoholic. At 24 years old in 1984, in the area where I was going to meetings, there were not a lot of young people. Most of the people seemed really old to me, and they were probably mostly around my age now. I'm in my mid-50s now. But I remember in particular, there were a couple of older people that were missing teeth that I just thought, I can't possibly relate to any of these people. And it was just another way for my ego to help isolate me so that I could continue down my path of drinking and getting worse. Step one is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2 through 12 are spiritual steps. But I was raised in a very strict Catholic household, and I felt that I would be betraying the religion that I was raised in. And so I had a really hard time getting beyond step 1. And also my higher power had my dad's face, and I was scared to death of my dad when I was growing up, and still was in my early 20s, and somehow thought that if he found out that I was doing AA, that it would be a betrayal to him. And I thought my world would end if he found that out. I did mention that I worked as a bartender. I often worked as a bartender at night, and it's just plain difficult to maintain a healthy, sober lifestyle when you're working in that kind of atmosphere. People want to buy you drinks all the time. Sometimes I would tell people that, no, I've got an infection and I'm taking biotics right now, so I'm not able to drink. And sometimes I could get through the night by not drinking, by giving that excuse. Sometimes I would tell people that I'd made a promise to somebody that I wasn't going to drink that night. But more often than not, I would end up drinking. I thought I was special. In the big book, the first 164 pages are the instructions, and I did read some of those instructions. But in the back of the book are the stories, and I was more interested in reading about the stories, more interested in story time than actually looking at the instructions. Because once again, the instructions included not just step 1, but 12 steps. And I just wasn't ready to look at the rest of the steps and actually commit. At the beginning of the book, in chapter 2, that chapter is called There is a Solution. And in that chapter, it talks about different kinds of drinkers. And that there's a certain kind of drinker that's a hard drinker, that under certain circumstances, they can quit drinking. And so I had this idea that someday I would be able to quit on my own, that I wasn't really an alcoholic. I didn't really need help, and someday I would be able to quit. But that day never came. And then the last thing that I can think of was that I don't know who this quote is attributed to, but The quote is, "Live fast, die young, leave a great body." I had this romantic idea that it was a good thing to die young. And so I used that as an excuse to continue drinking. I got sober for 5.5 months at age 24. And when I started drinking again, oh, we'll get into that in another video, the many reasons or a few excuses. The biggest reason why was I just wasn't ready. But I'll get into that at another time. I drank for 6.5 more years before I was ready to quit and use the program as my guide for a healthy, sober life.